in the shrouded quiet of a village nestled deep within an ancient forest, where shadows clung to the gnarled trees like old secrets, a young doctor named Lucas sought refuge from his own haunting past. He had come here to disappear, to bury the whispers and accusations that followed him after his wife's mysterious death. The city had become a cage of pointing fingers and pitying glances, and the silence of this remote settlement seemed to promise a kind of peace, a place where he could finally outrun the ghosts that plagued his waking hours. But he soon learned that some places have ghosts of their own, and they are far less willing to be ignored. The villagers, their faces etched with the hardships of a life lived on the edge of the wild, spoke in hushed, fearful tones of a presence that owned the night. They warned him of a sound that would soon become the rhythm of his dread, a desolate, ghostly howl that echoed through the valley precisely as the moon reached its zenith. This was not the cry of any mortal beast, they insisted. It was the voice of the Howling Wolf, the tormented spirit of a man who had long ago lost his soul to the woods and now roamed the darkness, eternally searching for a replacement to take his place and bear his curse. Lucas, a man of science and reason, initially dismissed their tales as rustic folklore, the superstitious ramblings of an isolated community. He had real horrors to contend with, the tangible grief and guilt that felt like a physical weight on his chest. What was a phantom howl compared to the vivid, recurring image of his wife's vacant eyes? He settled into the small, dusty clinic left by the previous doctor, the scent of antiseptic and decay hanging heavy in the air. For the first few nights, a profound and unnerving silence enveloped the village, a quiet so deep it felt like holding one's breath. But then, on the third night, it came. A long, mournful cry that seemed to rise from the very soil beneath his feet, piercing the stillness and sending a tremor of primal fear through his body. It was a sound of immense suffering, a lament that vibrated in the glass of his windows and in the marrow of his bones. He tried to rationalize it, to convince himself it was just a wolf or the wind playing tricks on the landscape, but the sound was too human too, filled with a recognizable agony that mirrored the one festering in his own heart. Villagers were right. It was a howl that sought not just to be heard, but to be understood. As the days bled into weeks, the nightly howl grew not just in volume, but in proximity. It was no longer a distant echo from the surrounding hills, but a chilling lament that seemed to emanate from just beyond his doorstep, as if the spirit was slowly, methodically closing in on him. The sound began to unravel the carefully constructed walls of his sanity. His sleep, once a brief escape, became a new landscape of terror. The visions that had tormented him since his wife's death intensified, twisting into new and more terrifying forms. He was no longer just a spectator to his past traumas. He was an active participant in a nightmare he couldn't control. He would dream of running, his bare feet pounding against damp earth and tangled roots, the forest a suffocating labyrinth of skeletal branches. The air in these dreams was thick with the scent of pine and decay, and the only sound was his own ragged breathing and the relentless pursuing howl that seemed to be coming from his own throat. The line between his sleeping and waking worlds began to dissolve. He would jolt awake, drenched in sweat, his heart hammering against his ribs, to find his reality disturbingly altered. Streaks of mud and damp leaves formed a trail from his front door to his bedside. The distinct, unsettling imprints of what looked like canine paws, far too large for any normal wolf, were pressed into the wooden floorboards, mapping a journey he had no memory of taking. On one particularly horrifying morning, he woke to the coppery taste of blood in his mouth and found dark, crimson stains splattered across his hands and bedsheets, a gruesome testament to a nocturnal savagery he could not comprehend. The villagers, who had initially offered him a wary welcome, now began to shy away, their eyes filled with a mixture of pity and fear. They saw the same darkness encroaching upon him that had claimed the man in their stories. The physical and mental toll was becoming undeniable. Dark circles shadowed Lucas's eyes, his hands trembled incessantly, and a wild, haunted look had replaced his once calm demeanor. He was a man coming apart at the seams, and they wanted no part of his disintegration. Desperate for answers for anything that could sever the tether to this encroaching madness, Lucas sought out the one person in the village who did not turn away from him. An old reclusive woman who lived on the edge of the woods, her cottage almost consumed by the forest itself. She was known as the Keeper of the Old Ways, a woman who spoke the language of spirits and secrets. Her face was a roadmap of wrinkles, and her eyes, cloudy with age, seemed to see past the physical world and into the realm of shadows. She listened patiently as Lucas, his voice cracking with exhaustion and terror, recounted the nightly howls, the terrifying dreams, and the inexplicable evidence of his nocturnal journeys. She nodded slowly, a deep and ancient understanding in her expression. The Howling Wolf was not just a story, she explained. It was a cycle. The spirit was a vessel, and the howl was its call, a summons for a new host. But there was a way, she whispered, her voice like the rustling of dry leaves, to not just break the curse, but to claim its power. The wolf is a servant of an older, deeper entity, she said, her gaze unwavering. Whoever looks into the eyes of the worm will gain the use of the soul. She offered no further explanation, leaving Lucas with a cryptic prophecy that planted a new and far more dangerous seed of curiosity within his despair. The old woman's words echoed in his mind, a riddle wrapped in an enigma. The eyes of the worm, what could it mean? Was it a metaphor, a test, or a literal instruction? His scientific mind reeled, but his desperation clawed at any sliver of hope, no matter how irrational. The nightly ritual continued, each howl drawing him deeper into the abyss. He felt a sense of inevitability, as if he were a pawn in a game whose rules he was only just beginning to learn. The wolf was no longer just a pursuer. It felt like a part of him, an alter ego that claimed his body while his mind was lost in nightmare-drenched sleep. He began to feel an odd sense of connection to the howl, a painful empathy for the creature's sorrow. He started to understand its loneliness, its unending search for release. Was he meant to be its replacement or its master? The line between being haunted and becoming the haunter blurred into non-existence. Then, one night, as the moon hung full and white in the inky sky, the howl transformed. It was no longer a distant cry, but a resonant internal vibration. It wasn't in the woods or at his door. It was inside his own head, a silent, deafening command. A single word bloomed in the core of his consciousness, a word in a language he had never heard, but understood with absolute, chilling clarity. It was the word that chose him. It was his new name. A searing, excruciating power surged through him, a fire that ignited in his soul and spread through every nerve and muscle. It felt as if his very bones were being broken and reformed, his human flesh tearing and reshaping into something else, something primal and ancient. He fell to the floor, convulsing, his screams swallowed by the greater howl that now erupted from his own transformed throat. The agony was immense, a crucible of change that burned away the man he was, the grieving doctor, the haunted husband, the terrified victim. When the transformation was complete, he rose no longer Lucas, but a creature of shadow and moonlight. He walked to the cracked mirror in his room, and the reflection that stared back was not his own. The eyes, once a soft human brown, were now blazing pools of liquid gold, radiating a chilling, predatory intelligence. They were the eyes of the wolf, filled with the power of the soul it had consumed, the knowledge of the worm it served. The howl that had once been his tormentor was now his own voice. He was the replacement. He was the Howling Wolf, and as he looked out at the silent, sleeping village, he felt a new and terrible hunger stir within him. The cycle was complete, and the search had begun anew.